The relay station on Kiros 7 looked like someone had dropped a prefab building onto a frozen wasteland and called it infrastructure. Marcus Webb stood in the main equipment room, running diagnostics on the primary communications array, and tried not to think about the fact that the nearest other human being was approximately 300 million kilometers away. VERA, what's the status on the secondary power coupling? The station's AI responded with her usual calm efficiency. Operating at 92% capacity, within acceptable parameters, but I recommend inspection within the next 48 hours. Add it to the list. Marcus made a note on his datapad, which already contained about 30 similar items. Frontier station maintenance was a never-ending cycle of preventing catastrophic failures through obsessive attention to minor problems. He'd been stationed on Kiros 7 for 6 months, halfway through his contract with the Terran Exploration Corps. The pay was excellent, the work straightforward, and the isolation exactly what he'd signed up for. After spending 4 years in university engineering programs, surrounded by constant social demands and expectations, Marcus had discovered he did his best work when the only conversation partner was an AI who didn't care about small talk. Kiros 7 itself was a study in hostile beauty. The planet orbited its star at a distance that left it in perpetual twilight, the surface temperature averaging -40°C on a warm day. The landscape was frozen plains broken by massive ice formations that caught the dim sunlight and refracted it into pale rainbows. Marcus had grown to appreciate the stark aesthetic during his weekly exterior maintenance checks, though he'd never admit that to anyone who might interpret it as loneliness. "Marcus, I'm detecting an emergency beacon activation," VERA announced, her tone shifting to alert status. "Distance, 41.3 kilometers, bearing 273 degrees. Marcus looked up from his diagnostic screen, frowning. "Identify the source." "Unknown. The signal is standard interstellar distress protocol, but the encoding suggests non-Terran origin. Analysis indicates possible Carvati military frequency." "Carvati? Out here?" Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The Carvati Defense Legion had a treaty with the Terran Exploration Corps, an uneasy peace negotiated after 3 minor skirmishes over frontier mining rights, but that didn't mean their presence wasn't complicated. "Can you determine what happened?" "Negative. I'm only receiving the automated beacon. No voice transmission, no detailed telemetry. Protocol requires investigation and rendering of aid if possible." Marcus stared at the beacon's coordinates on the display, his mind already running through the logistics. 41 kilometers across Kiros 7 frozen surface in the terrain rover, probably 3 hours each way given the ice ridge formations. Pack survival gear, medical supplies, rescue equipment. Risk assessment, moderate to high depending on what caused the distress signal. VERA prepped the rover, full rescue loadout, I'll suit up. 20 minutes later, Marcus was driving across the frozen plains in a vehicle designed for exactly this kind of emergency. The rover's heated cabin kept him comfortable while the external sensors painted a real-time map of the treacherous terrain. Ice ridges rose like frozen waves, forcing him to navigate carefully between them. The distress beacon grew stronger as he approached, and eventually Marcus spotted the wreckage, a Carvati shuttle, one of their smaller reconnaissance models, crumpled against a massive ice formation. The crash looked recent. Steam still rose from damaged components where hot metal met frozen air. Marcus brought the rover to a stop at a safe distance and activated the external scanners. Life signs. 1, approximately 20 meters from the wreckage. Human-adjacent biology, but with the elevated body temperature and denser skeletal structure, consistent with Carvati physiology. He grabbed the medical kit and emergency thermal wrap, then stepped out into Kiros 7 brutal cold. Even through his thermal suit, he could feel the temperature trying to leach away his heat. He moved carefully toward the life sign, boots crunching on frozen ground. She was standing, That was the first surprise. Most crash survivors weren't mobile this soon. She stood near a piece of debris that might have been the shuttle's wing, her back to him, and even from a distance Marcus could see her thermal suit was damaged, the heating elements offline along her left side. "Hello," Marcus called out, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I'm Marcus Webb, Terran Exploration Corps. I received your distress beacon. I'm here to help." She turned, and Marcus got his first clear look at a Carvati in person, rather than on briefing hollows. She was tall, easily 2 meters, with a build that suggested strength even through the bulky thermal suit. Her face was striking. Sharp features, amber eyes that fixed on him with predatory focus, and the distinctive long, curved ears that rose from the sides of her head and currently pressed flat against her skull. Injured, Marcus's mind supplied. That ear position indicates pain or distress. "I am Lieutenant Serac of the Carvati Defense Legion," she said, her voice carrying the clipped precision of military training filtered through a translator implant. "My shuttle experienced critical system failure during atmospheric entry. I am operational, but my emergency systems are compromised." Marcus noticed she swayed slightly as she spoke. "You're injured. I have medical supplies and a heated shelter. Let me help." Serac's ears flicked. Uncertainty, maybe, or calculation. Accepting assistance creates obligation debt according to Carvati custom. "I would prefer to await extraction by my own forces." "How long until they arrive?" A pause. "Estimate 10 to 12 days depending on patrol routes. You'll freeze in 12 hours with that damaged suit." Marcus stepped closer, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. "I'm not asking for debt or obligation. I'm offering basic humanitarian assistance. You need help, I can provide it. That's the entire transaction." Serac studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for something. Then her ears tilted forward slightly. Acceptance, Marcus hoped, and she nodded once. "Your logic is sound. I accept your assistance, Engineer Webb." Marcus is fine. He approached with the thermal wrap, and Serac stood rigidly still while he assessed her suit damage. The heating elements along her left side were completely offline, and there was a concerning dent near her ribs that suggested impact trauma. "Can you walk to my rover, or do you need support?" "I can walk." She did, though Marcus noticed the careful way she moved, the slight favor of her right side. He helped her into the rover's passenger seat, cranking the interior heat higher than human comfortable but probably appropriate for someone who'd been slowly freezing. As he drove them back toward the relay station, Serac sat in rigid silence, her ears swiveling constantly to track sounds. Marcus focused on navigating the ice ridges and tried not to think about the political complications of hosting a Carvati military officer in a Terran facility. "Your station is solo-occupied?" Serac asked finally. "Just me and VERA, that's the station AI. It's designed for single-operator maintenance." "That seems inefficient." "It's peaceful." Marcus navigated around a particularly sharp ice formation. "I prefer working alone." Serac's ears tilted forward slightly. "I volunteered for solo reconnaissance missions for similar reasons." The Carvati military hierarchy can be exhausting. Marcus glanced at her in surprise. He'd expected formal military distance, not casual admission of preference for solitude. "How long were you supposed to be on recon?" 40 days surveying mineral deposits in this sector. I was on day 3 when the shuttle systems failed." Her tone carried frustration. "A waste of mission time and resources." "You survived a crash landing on one of the least hospitable planets in this sector. I'd say that's a success, not a waste." He thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Maybe the Carvati equivalent of a smile. Maybe just translator artifacts in her expression. The relay station appeared ahead, its lights creating a small oasis of warmth against the frozen twilight. Marcus pulled the rover into the sheltered bay and helped Serac out, noticing she leaned on him more than she probably wanted to admit. "VERA, we have a guest. Lieutenant Serac of the Carvati Defense Legion. Crashed shuttle injured, needs medical assessment and accommodation. Acknowledged, VERA responded. Welcome, Lieutenant Sarak. Medical Bay is prepared for assessment. I should note that my medical database for Carvati physiology is limited to basic parameters. I have field medical training for my own species, Sarak said. If you provide access to your supplies, I can perform self-assessment. Marcus led her through the station's narrow corridors to the compact medical bay. It was designed for emergency human treatment, but the basic equipment was universal enough. Everything here is available. If you need anything else, just ask VERA. Sarak nodded, then hesitated. You have provided assistance beyond standard humanitarian protocols. I am grateful, though my culture struggles with the expression. You don't need to be grateful, you just need to heal. Marcus moved toward the door, then paused. I'll prepare quarters for you. The station isn't designed for two, but we'll manage. He left her to her medical assessment and headed to the station's small storage area, pulling out the emergency cot and bedding designed for exactly this kind of unexpected situation. As he set up a sleeping space in what had been a storage corner, Marcus reflected on the absurdity of his situation. 6 months of perfect isolation, and now he was hosting an alien warrior from a species humanity had barely stopped shooting at 2 decades ago. Someone who would be sharing his small station for at least 10 days while they waited for rescue. His carefully controlled solitude had just become infinitely more complicated. VERA, he said quietly, I'm going to need that full cultural briefing on Carvati customs, all of it. Downloading now, the AI responded. Marcus, for what it's worth, your instinct to help was correct. The Carvati value pragmatic action over hesitation. Let's hope they also value not killing people who see them injured and vulnerable. Lieutenant Sarak's physiological readings suggest exhaustion and pain, but not hostility. I believe you're safe. Marcus finished setting up the cot and tried to believe that. Outside, Kiero's 7 perpetual twilight cast long shadows across the frozen plains. Inside, an injured alien warrior assessed her wounds in his medical bay. 10 days minimum until rescue arrived. This was either going to be the longest or shortest 10 days of Marcus's life, and he genuinely couldn't predict which. The first 3 days established a careful rhythm of coexistence. Sarak refused the medical bay as sleeping quarters, insisting that accepting more aid than strictly necessary would create complicated obligation debts that Marcus didn't understand but chose to respect. She took the storage area cot without complaint, spending her waking hours either repairing her damaged equipment or attempting to boost the emergency beacon's transmission range. Marcus continued his station maintenance routines, hyper-aware of the additional person sharing his small domain. The station had been peaceful in solitude. With 2 occupants, it felt simultaneously cramped and oddly alive. He heard Sarak moving through the corridors, her footsteps heavier than his, the soft sounds of her working on Carvati technology that hummed at frequencies slightly different from Terran equipment. They spoke when necessary, coordinating use of the fabrication shop, discussing resource allocation, confirming meal schedules. Sarak prepared her own food from her shuttle's salvaged rations, declining Marcus's offers to share Terran supplies with formal courtesy that suggested accepting would complicate things. Marcus buried himself in his downloaded cultural briefing during evening hours, learning about Carvati honor codes, military hierarchy, and the complex web of obligation and debt that governed their social interactions. It was fascinating in an academic way and utterly exhausting in practical application. Everything meant something. Every gesture carried weight. On the 4th day, the station's atmospheric processor began making concerning sounds during Marcus's routine inspection. He was shoulder-deep in the access panel, trying to diagnose the issue, when Sarak appeared in the doorway. The harmonic frequency suggests a failing bearing in the secondary circulation pump, she said without preamble. Marcus extracted himself from the panel and looked at her in surprise. You're familiar with Terran environmental systems. Military reconnaissance training includes basic operation of allied and neutral species technology. Your atmospheric processors share fundamental principles with ours. Her ears tilted forward slightly. May I assist? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. If you're comfortable working with unfamiliar systems. The bearing access requires small hands, which actually gives you an advantage despite. He caught himself before saying something potentially offensive about her size. Sarak's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. Despite my species' reputation for smashing things and asking questions later, I wasn't going to phrase it exactly that way. But you were thinking it. She moved to the access panel, her large hands surprisingly deft as she examined the interior. Karvati warriors are trained for fine manipulation as well as combat. Pass me the sonic calibrator. They worked together for the next 2 hours, Marcus providing tools and guidance while Sarak's superior reach and strength made the actual repairs possible. A rhythm developed. Marcus would identify the problem, Sarak would execute the solution, and gradually the atmospheric processor's alarming sounds resolved into healthy mechanical humming. That should hold for another 6 months minimum, Marcus said, running final diagnostics. Nice work. Adequate teamwork, Sarak corrected, but her ears tilted forward in what Marcus had learned indicated pleasure or satisfaction. That evening, they ended up in the station's compact meal preparation area at the same time, an overlap Marcus had carefully avoided for days, but which now seemed natural after the afternoon's cooperation. He prepared his standard ration enhancement protocol, while Sarak heated one of her protein packs, and the silence that had been carefully maintained before felt less necessary. "What is Earth like?" Sarak asked suddenly, her amber eyes fixed on Marcus with genuine curiosity. The briefings provide geographical data but not experience. Marcus considered while adding spices to his rehydrated meal. Crowded mostly. At least the parts I'm from. Billions of people all pressed together, constant noise and interaction and social expectation. He stirred his food, remembering. I spent 4 years in engineering school surrounded by classmates who couldn't understand why I'd rather work alone than join team projects. They thought I was antisocial or damaged somehow. Were you? Maybe a little damaged, definitely antisocial by their standards. He looked up to find Sarak watching him with focused attention, her ears tilted forward. I'm better with systems than people. Systems follow logical rules, people don't. Carvet is similar, crowded, hierarchical, demanding constant awareness of social positioning. Sarak's voice carried a note Marcus hadn't heard before, something almost vulnerable beneath the military precision. I volunteered for solo reconnaissance specifically to escape the rigid protocols of Legion life. My commanders considered it proof of exceptional dedication. In truth, I simply wanted silence. Marcus felt something shift in how he understood her. Not just a warrior from a species with complicated politics, but someone who'd chosen isolation for the same reasons he had. How long have you been doing solo missions? 3 years. 40-day deployments with 30 days of mandatory social reintegration between assignments. Her ears flicked in what looked like irritation. The reintegration is worse than the isolation. I spend 30 days performing appropriate social behaviors until I'm assigned another mission and can leave again. That sounds exhausting. It is efficient, Sarak said, but without conviction. They ate in companionable silence after that, and Marcus reflected on the strangeness of finding common ground with an alien warrior over shared introversion. When Sarak stood to return to her quarters, she paused at the doorway. "Thank you for the conversation, Engineer Webb." "Marcus," he corrected, "and you're welcome, Lieutenant." "Sarak," she said quietly, "if we're dispensing with formality." She left before Marcus could respond, but he sat in the empty meal area for a long time afterward, thinking about the careful distance they'd maintained dissolving into something that felt distinctly like friendship. The next morning, VERA's alert chime woke Marcus earlier than usual. He stumbled to the control station to find critical system warnings flashing across multiple screens. VERA, report. The primary power core degradation has accelerated beyond predicted models. Current estimates suggest complete failure in 6 days, plus or minus 18 hours. Marcus felt his stomach drop. That's 4 days before minimum rescue arrival. Correct. The ion storm that damaged Lieutenant Sarac's shuttle also affected the station's shielding. Cumulative radiation damage to the core's containment matrix is causing cascade degradation. Can we stabilize it? Not with current station resources. However, Lieutenant Sarac's shuttle wreckage contains compatible power regulation components. Integrating them might extend core stability through rescue arrival. Marcus pulled up the technical specifications, his engineer's mind already working through the integration challenges. It was possible, but it would require salvaging parts from the wreck, hauling them back across 40 kilometers of frozen terrain, and performing delicate integration work under time pressure. Sarac appeared in the doorway already dressed and alert, her ears swiveled toward the diagnostic displays, reading the data with obvious understanding. "Your power core is failing," she stated. "Yes. VERA suggests we can stabilize it using components from your shuttle. It'll require both of us. I need your technical knowledge of Carvati systems, and you need my understanding of the station's architecture." "How long do we have?" 6 days until failure. Probably need 4 to complete the integration safely." Sarac's ears went rigid for a moment, processing, calculating, then tilted forward with decision. "We should begin immediately. I will prepare salvage equipment." She left without waiting for agreement, and Marcus watched her go with a mix of gratitude and apprehension. The careful distance they'd maintained, the formal courtesy, all of it was about to be tested by the desperate intimacy of survival cooperation. The isolated peace he'd cultivated on Kiros 7 was officially over. Now it was just 2 people, 1 failing power core, and 6 days to save both their lives using salvaged parts and desperate ingenuity. Marcus pulled up the salvage mission parameters and began planning their route to the wreck. Outside, Kiros 7 twilight landscape waited, beautiful and utterly indifferent to whether they survived or not. Days 5 and 6 dissolved into physical exhaustion and focused determination. Marcus and Sarac made 2 trips to the shuttle wreck, each one a grueling 8-hour-round journey across ice ridges that seemed designed to break equipment and spirits. The Carvati power regulation components were heavy, awkwardly shaped, and desperately necessary. On the first trip, they worked with careful professionalism, Sarac using her superior strength to extract components while Marcus assessed which parts were salvageable. On the second trip, exhaustion eroded formality. They developed efficient shorthand. Sarac would gesture at a component, Marcus would nod or shake his head, and they'd move to the next decision without wasting energy on words. Back at the station, they hauled their salvage into the engineering bay and began the delicate work of integration planning. Marcus spread technical schematics across every available surface, while Sarac cross-referenced Carvati military specifications, translating technical terminology that didn't quite map to Terran equivalents. "This power coupling uses a resonance frequency that's incompatible with your containment matrix," Sarac said, pointing at a component they'd pulled from the shuttle's engine core. "But if we modify the harmonic dampener here," she indicated a section of the station's existing systems, "we can create a buffer that allows safe integration." Marcus studied her proposal, running calculations in his head. "That'll work, but it requires someone to be inside the core chamber during calibration. Real-time adjustments based on resonance feedback. Dangerous. Potentially fatal if the calibration goes wrong. The core chamber will be partially active during the process." Sarac's ears tilted forward. "I volunteer for the chamber work. My species has higher radiation tolerance than yours." but I know the station systems better. I can make the adjustments faster." Marcus met her amber eyes directly. "And your knowledge of the Carvati components is critical for the monitoring station. You need to be outside the chamber, guiding me through the integration." They stared at each other for a long moment, the argument hanging between them. Then Sarak's ears flicked in what Marcus had learned was reluctant acceptance. "Logical," she admitted, "but I dislike it." "So do I," Marcus said honestly, "but we don't have better options." On the 7th day, they began the actual integration. Marcus suited up in the station's radiation gear, inadequate for prolonged exposure but the best they had, and entered the power core chamber. The space was cramped, designed for quick emergency access rather than extended work. Emergency lighting cast everything in amber shadows. Sarak's voice came through his comm with crystalline clarity. "I have full monitoring capability. Your radiation exposure is within acceptable limits for now, but we need to complete this quickly." "Understood." Marcus positioned himself beneath the primary coupling junction, already feeling the heat radiating from the partially active core. Beginning first connection sequence. The work required absolute precision. Marcus's hands moved through practiced motions, connecting Carvati components to Terran systems using adapter assemblies they'd fabricated from salvaged materials. Each connection had to be perfect. One mistake could cause cascade failure. "Resonance frequency is spiking," Sarak reported. "Adjust the dampener 3 degrees counterclockwise." Marcus made the adjustment, feeling the vibration in the coupling change. "Better." Stabilizing, continue to the next junction. Hours passed in concentrated effort. Marcus's world narrowed to Sarak's voice, his hands, and the delicate work of making incompatible systems cooperate. Sweat soaked his undersuit despite the chamber's theoretical cooling systems. His muscles ached from the awkward positions required by the tight workspace. "Connection sparking at Junction 7, Sarak's voice carried sudden alarm. "Marcus, are you—" "I'm fine," he interrupted, though the jolt through his glove had been concerning. "Just a minor discharge, the insulation held." "Your biometrics spiked." She didn't sound professional now, she sounded worried. "If you're injured." "I'm not." "Really, Sarak," just startled. He made a small adjustment to reduce the charge buildup. "How's the overall integration looking?" A pause while she assessed. 73% complete. Core stability is improving." "You're doing excellent work." "We're doing excellent work," Marcus corrected. "Your guidance is what makes this possible." He couldn't see her, but he heard something in her voice when she responded, warmth beneath the technical precision. "Partners in survival, then?" "Apparently so." They continued through the integration sequence, falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite the danger. Marcus trusted Sarak's instructions completely, and she responded to his questions with patience that suggested equal trust. Two specialists, different species and cultures, working together because their lives depended on it. Finally, near midnight by the station's arbitrary clock, Marcus connected the last junction. Final integration complete. Running diagnostic now. The power core hummed with new stability, its various components harmonizing in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. Marcus watched the readings climb toward acceptable parameters and felt exhaustion crash over him like a wave. "Core is stable," Sarak confirmed, and her voice carried relief so profound it bypassed her usual control. "You did it, Marcus. We're going to survive." Marcus extracted himself from the chamber, with muscles that barely responded to commands. He emerged into the access corridor to find Sarak waiting, her ears tilted forward with obvious pleasure, her amber eyes bright with something that looked like joy. 72 hours until minimum rescue arrival," she said. "The core will hold." Marcus swayed, caught himself against the wall, and Sarak was there immediately. Her hand closed around his arm, gentle despite her strength, steadying him without making him feel weak. Their eyes met in the dim emergency lighting, and Marcus felt something shift between them. They'd moved beyond careful cooperation into something deeper, trust earned through shared danger, connection forged in the intimate work of mutual survival. Sarak's ears went suddenly rigid, and her hand withdrew from his arm as if burned. She stepped back, reverting to formal distance with visible effort. "You performed admirably, Engineer Webb," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "You should rest. I will monitor the core through the night." She turned and walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone in the corridor with the ghost of her grip on his arm and the memory of amber eyes that had looked at him with something beyond professional respect. Marcus stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened and what it might mean. Then he headed to his quarters, his mind full of questions he wasn't sure he should ask. Outside, Kiro's 7 frozen landscape continued its perpetual twilight, beautiful and indifferent. Inside the relay station, something had changed between two isolated people who'd found unexpected connection in the darkness. Marcus lay on his bunk, too exhausted to sleep, and wondered what the next 72 hours would bring. Day 8 began with routine: systems check, core monitoring, meal preparation. Marcus moved through his tasks on autopilot, his body functioning despite exhaustion while his mind replayed the moment in the corridor. Sarak's hand on his arm, her sudden withdrawal, the rigid ears that suggested overwhelming emotion barely controlled. The power core required manual adjustment every 6 hours, a task they'd agreed to split. Marcus took the first shift, squeezing into the chamber's cramped space and making fractional changes to maintain stability. The work was tedious but necessary, requiring focus that left no room for distracting thoughts about alien warriors and the complicated feelings developing in a frontier station designed for solitude. At midnight station time, during what should have been Marcus's sleep period, he returned to the core chamber for his scheduled adjustment shift. He'd been working for about 20 minutes when he heard footsteps in the access corridor. Sarak appeared at the chamber entrance, her sleep clothes exchanged for work gear. "I could not sleep. May I assist?" Marcus looked up from the power relay he was calibrating. The chamber was barely large enough for one person to work comfortably. 2 would require close quarters. But Sarak's technical knowledge had been invaluable during the integration, and some of these adjustments would go faster with her guidance. "Yeah, come on in. Just watch the low clearance on the left side." Sarak maneuvered into the chamber with careful precision, her larger frame requiring more attention to the tight space. She positioned herself next to Marcus, close enough that he could feel warmth radiating from her body. Carvati ran several degrees hotter than humans, a fact that became immediately relevant in the confined chamber. They worked in focused silence, Marcus making adjustments while Sarak monitored readings on the portable diagnostic unit. The chamber's emergency lighting cast amber shadows, turning the cramped space into something almost intimate. Marcus found himself hyper-aware of every small movement: the brush of Sarak's arm against his when she shifted position, the sound of her controlled breathing, the way her ears swiveled to track the core's harmonics. "The resonance on Junction 4 is drifting," Sarak said quietly, leaning closer to check Marcus's work. Her shoulder pressed against his back as she provided better angle for the diagnostic light. "Need to compensate 3 microns north." Marcus made the adjustment with hands that were completely steady despite his racing heart. Having Sarak this close, working in partnership with the kind of trust that only came from shared survival, felt simultaneously natural and terrifyingly significant. He finished the calibration and was reaching for the next relay when Sarak spoke again, so quietly he almost missed it over the core's ambient hum. "Do you want me now or later?" Marcus's hands froze on the relay. The question hung in the amber-lit space between them, and even without full cultural context, he understood instinctively that this was significant, important, a moment that would define something fundamental. He turned his head to look at her directly. In the confined space, their faces were inches apart. Sarak's ears stood perfectly rigid, The same position he'd seen when she was injured, but different somehow. Not pain, something else entirely. Her amber eyes searched his face with an intensity that made him feel completely seen. Marcus's engineer mind raced through implications, cultural protocols, political complications, the memory of downloading Carvati customs briefings that mentioned bonding practices he'd skimmed without deep reading. But beneath the analysis, something simpler responded. This woman had trusted him with her life, had worked beside him through desperate circumstances, had shown him the isolation they both chose and the connection they'd accidentally found. He could deflect, could pretend he didn't understand the weight of her question, could maintain the safe distance that kept everything simple, or he could honor the trust she just offered with equal honesty. "Now," Marcus said quietly, holding her gaze, "if you're sure now." Sarak's entire body began trembling, a full-body response that started in her core and radiated outward. Her rigid ears quivered, her breathing became unsteady, and her eyes widened with something between shock and wonder. She gripped the edge of the relay housing to steady herself, and Marcus realized with alarm that he'd triggered something physiological, some response she clearly hadn't expected. He reached for her instinctively, concerned, and she caught his hand with her own. Her grip was tight, almost desperate, but carefully controlled to avoid crushing his more fragile human bones. "This is," her voice shook, all military precision stripped away. "This is the bonding response. I've never, Marcus, do you understand what you've just agreed to?" "No," he admitted honestly, tightening his grip on her trembling hand. "But I want you to explain it. We have time." Sarak's trembling began to subside slowly, replaced by something that looked like fierce concentration as she fought for control. When she spoke, her voice was still unsteady but determined. "Among my people, there is a practice older than our military traditions, older than our expansion to the stars, the life bond." She took a careful breath. "It is not marriage as humans understand it, not a ceremony or contract. It is an offer of absolute trust between two people who choose partnership over isolation. The question you asked, is that offer, do you want me now or later, means, will you accept immediate bond formation or would you prefer to explore possibility over time?" Her ears, still quivering slightly, tilted forward. There is no casual involvement, no halfway measure, only the choice between commitment and refusal. Marcus processed this, his analytical mind working through implications while his heart hammered against his ribs. And my answer triggered. "What exactly?" "The bonding response, a physiological reaction that cannot be faked or forced, only honestly given when someone accepts the offer with true intent." Sarak's grip on his hand gentled slightly. "My body recognized your acceptance as genuine and responded with the instinctive certainty that you meant what you said. It is overwhelming. Do you regret asking?" "No," the word came without hesitation, fierce and certain. "But Marcus, our governments will struggle with this. A human and a Carvati forming a life bond. It has no precedent, no diplomatic framework, no cultural translation that will make it simple." "I don't care about simple." Marcus met her eyes directly, his engineer's precision applied to the most important calculation he'd ever made. "I care about honest. You asked an honest question. I gave an honest answer. Everything else is complications we'll figure out together." "Together," Sarak repeated, and her trembling stopped entirely, replaced by something that looked like joy breaking through warrior discipline. "I have spent 3 years choosing isolation over connection, because connection within my culture required compromising who I am. And then I crash on a frozen planet and meet a human engineer who chose isolation for the same reasons." "That seems like poor planning on the universe's part," Marcus said, "putting two isolated people together and expecting them to stay distant. Terrible planning." Sarak's mouth curved in what was definitely a smile. "We should file a complaint." They sat in the amber-lit chamber, hands still clasped, both acutely aware that they'd just fundamentally changed their relationship through a question, an answer that their respective governments weren't prepared for. "We should finish the core adjustments," Marcus said eventually, remaining professional while processing life-altering emotional developments. "Very practical." "Very us," Serac agreed, but she didn't let go of his hand immediately. They completed the core calibration together, movements occasionally interrupted by Serac's residual trembling or Marcus's need to simply look at her and confirm this was real. The work that should have taken 20 minutes stretched to 40, but the core hummed with perfect stability when they finished. Emerging from the chamber, they stood in the access corridor with 2 days remaining until rescue, and everything between them changed. "What happens when they arrive?" Marcus asked. "Your people, my people, all the politics we've ignored while focused on survival." "Complications," Serac said. "Questions about protocols violated, concerns about precedent, debates about whether life bonds formed between species are valid under existing treaties." Her ears tilted forward with determination. "But the bond is formed. It cannot be withdrawn or invalidated by political inconvenience." "Good." Marcus felt something settle in his chest, certainty replacing the anxiety he'd carried for 8 days. "Because I didn't survive a power core integration and emotional vulnerability, just to let bureaucrats decide what I feel." Spoken like someone who's never dealt with Carvati military administrative processes. "I've dealt with Terran exploration core paperwork. I think I can handle it." Serac's laugh was quiet but genuine. "You have no idea what you've agreed to." "Probably not," Marcus admitted. "But I'd rather figure it out with you than stay safe and alone." They stood in the corridor as Kiro's 7 systems hummed around them. 2 people who'd chosen isolation until circumstance and honesty forged something neither had planned for. 48 hours until rescue," Serac said quietly. "We should rest. Tomorrow will bring complications enough." "Together, though," Marcus said. "We face them together." "Together," Serac confirmed, and the word carried the weight of the bond they'd formed in amber light and trembling honesty. She returned to her quarters and Marcus to his, but the distance between them had changed. No longer careful separation but conscious choice to respect space while acknowledging connection. Marcus lay on his bunk and thought about the question he'd answered, the trembling response it had triggered, and the fierce joy in Serac's eyes when she'd confirmed the bond was real. In 48 hours, rescue would arrive. Governments would ask questions. Protocols would be examined. Political analysts would debate precedent. But in this moment, on a frozen planet at the edge of explored space, 2 isolated people had chosen each other with an honesty that transcended diplomacy. Marcus touched the hand that had held Serac's trembling grip and smiled in the darkness. The complications could wait. For now, this was enough.